So there's
Who is?
no. So we're broken in the back window.
All right, hold on.
She's on the ground. And there's
Come on.
Is she okay?
Come on.
Is she gonna be okay?
Come on.
Oh my dad!
What happened? What's going on? What's going on?
We heard a bang. We heard a bang. She told me to get out. And that's we came back. And she was on the ground.
This footage captures the moment law enforcement officers arrive at an Ohio home after receiving reports of a disturbance. They have no idea what they're walking into. A hysterical teenage girl greets them at the door. She is covered in blood and claims that an intruder has been in the home. In the master bedroom, they find the slain body of the girl's mother. But while police search the house for evidence of an assailant, a shocking truth comes to light. The killer is the young girl herself. The case of 19-year-old Sydney Powell, who murdered her mother in the family home in March of 2020, has divided a community. A psychiatric evaluation in the wake of the murder would conclude that she was suffering psychosis at the time of the killing. But with Sydney's history of lying and the presence of mind to stage the crime scene, many had their doubts. Was it insanity or something more sinister? Before we begin, we would like to send our deepest sympathies to the loved ones of Brenda Powell, who fell victim to the horrific events described in this case. It's 11 a.m. on March the 3rd, 2020. 50-year-old Stephen Powell is at work at the family steel treating company in Akron, Ohio, when he receives a notification on his phone. Life 360, a friend tracking app, has sent an alert that his 19-year-old daughter Sydney has just arrived home. Stephen is worried. The school term hasn't finished, and Sydney is not supposed to be back for another week. What's more, earlier in that day, he received a troubling phone call from a staff member at the university who told him that Sydney was no longer enrolled.
So you get a notification that Sydney's at home, correct?
Yes,
When you see that, you go home.
correct.
All right, and why did you go home?
See why she was home?
Okay. Did you have any concern for her at that time?
Just because Mom Union said she wasn't enrolled, but no, I was going to go home and see why she was home so early.
And did you take your phone with you when you went home?
No,
And why not?
I just left it at work so the 360 app wouldn't show me coming home.
Okay. Did you not want Sydney to be able to see that you were coming home?
I would imagine that was my intent.
Okay.
Stephen makes the 15-minute drive back to his house, where he finds Sydney in the basement. He gently presses her on the situation at the university, but she still insists that she is enrolled at Mount Union.
So she told you she was essentially still enrolled, but just having some trouble?
I don't know if she used the word trouble, but
And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You tell me. What did she say?
she was, I don't remember the details, but I remember she said she was still going to some of her classes with her friend Lauren.
What was, when she told you this, what was your response?
That we would work it out.
Okay. Do you remember telling her, and I know you had a conversation with the police too, do you remember telling her that, you can't run away from your problems, you have to face them?
And so we'd go through, you guys get through this semester, and if we needed to take the summer off or go to school, we would work through it. I remember she said, all her friends had their shit together and she doesn't, and I told her, no, that's not true.
Do you remember telling her, let's call the school back, get reinstated, something along those lines?
And I think I said, let's call your mother. I think I said, let's call your mother.
Okay, and why did you say that?
Brenda was better at things like that than me.
And do you mean by dealing with Sydney or the college or both?
Probably both.
Did you stay at home? I'm sorry, do you need a minute?
No, go ahead.
Hi, sir. Did you stay at home until Brenda got there, or did you leave before she got home?
I left before she got.
At a loss, Stephen calls his wife, 50-year-old Brenda Powell. Brenda is a child specialist at the Akron Children's Hospital with years of experience in dealing with emotionally charged situations. She's also incredibly close to their daughter, Sydney. Stephen leaves Sydney at home to wait for Brenda, and he returns to work. A short time later, staff at Mount Union University receive a voice message from Brenda Powell asking for a call back. Associate Dean Michelle Gaffney and Dean of Student Affairs John Fraser are between meetings when they learn that Brenda Powell is trying to get a hold of them. Brenda, they know, is the mother of a student they'd recently had some trouble with, Sydney Powell. Bracing themselves for a potentially difficult conversation, they head to the office of Dean Fraser to return the call.
What did you and Mr. John Fraser do once you received that voice message?
So we were walking back together, and we still had some work to do from the meeting we left, and Dean Fraser said, why don't we just go to my office and make this call first? He dialed, the phone was answered, and Mrs. Powell answered.
You say Mrs. Powell, is that Brenda who answered?
Brenda answered, yes.
And what did you tell Brenda at that time?
So Dean Fraser was speaking and simply said, Brenda, this is Dean Fraser. I'm sitting here with Michelle Gaffney, our Associate Dean of Students. We're returning your call, and that's about as far as we got.
And Miss Gaffney, what happened next?
There was a very large, or a very loud sort of thud sound, like a pounding or a thud, accompanied by a pretty loud scream. We're both talking into the phone, saying, what's happening? Are you okay? Do you need help? What's going on?
And when you say the phone cut off, did the call drop? Or
the call dropped.
Okay.
We lost the call. We called the number back.
Brenda's number
that she'd left, and we called twice, and there was no answer. It rang and no answer. When it went to voicemail, we hung up and we called again. The phone was answered on the third try to the number. And Dean Fraser said something along the lines of, Brenda, is that you? Are you there? And the voice on the other end said, yes, this is Brenda. Yes, this is Brenda.
Now, Miss Gaffney, did you recognize that voice on the line?
Yeah.
And was that Brenda Powell?
It was not Brenda.
Who did you recognize that voice?
I was sure it was Sydney. Both Dean Fraser and I looked at each other and sort of shook our heads at each other and said, that's not Brenda. And he then said, Sydney, I think this is you. This is not Brenda.
And what happened next?
The phone went dead.
And Miss Gaffney, what did you do next?
We called the Akron police.
When the police arrive at the home on Scudder Road, they are totally unprepared for what they find.
She's on the ground. So there's
Who is?
my mom. Someone broke into my window.
All right, hold on.
She's on the ground. And there's there's so much blood. No, please.
Man!
She's on the
Stop! Hold on, we gotta figure out what's going on! Come on. Just need to cooperate with me, alright?
Oh, my dad.
Huh?
Oh, my dad.
What happened? What's going on? What's going on?
We heard a bang. And she told me to get out. And then I heard screaming. And I came back and she was on the ground.
Okay, you
I
heard a
ran out
bang.
back. It was a big broken.
An officer takes Sydney outside. She tells police that she heard a bang and that her mother told her to get out, and then she heard screams. Before the police can prevent him, Sydney's dad, Stephen, rushes into the house.
What's your name, ma'am? Sorry, what's your name again? She's got cuts on her hand.
Okay. Take care of her.
I think this is your dad.
Yeah, I'm the dad.
Can you stay here for that?
You said your name's Sydney? Ma'am, is your name Sydney? What's your last name?
Yes, I know.
What is it? Powell. Sir, we don't...
No. She's having a little trouble at school at Mount Union, and she came back home to try and work things out. Just today is when I found it. I think she's been going to crash for the last couple of weeks.
She just came home today?
Yeah, today. It's like 11 o'clock.
Sydney! What's going on? Huh?
The officer notices Sydney has cuts on her hand. While he is in the process of confirming her name and date of birth, she suddenly slumps sideways and lies catatonic in the fetal position until paramedics arrive.
What was she doing at the time you guys were sitting outside?
I asked her name. She did give me her name, Sydney Powell. And then when I asked her for her date of birth, she fell over on her right side from the seating position. And while she was laying there, she's kind of like tapping her head on the pavement and then rubbing the ground with her left hand.
And is it fair to say that Miss Powell was not answering your questions at that time?
Yes.
Sydney! Can you tell me what happened? Huh? Sydney!
Detectives later describe hearing her whispering, "Get out, get out, get out." In the master bedroom of the house, officers find Brenda Powell lying on her back on the floor. She has suffered multiple blows to the head and stab wounds to the neck and arms. Next to her lies a cast iron frying pan and a steak knife. Brenda is taken by ambulance to the hospital where she was pronounced dead a short time later. Sydney is also taken to the hospital where she is treated for minor injuries. For Sydney's family, the horror of what has just unfolded is impossible to process, and it's about to get even worse. That night, police arrest Sydney Powell for the murder of her mother. Her family are shell-shocked. How could this happen? Sydney has never been violent in her life and always close to her mother. Were there signs that were missed? Growing up, Sydney had an idyllic childhood with a younger brother and two loving parents. The family enjoyed regular picnics and holidays.
Spring breaks, we just hung out at home and did stuff together. Once every summer, though, we'd go on a family vacation, either to Disney or the beach.
Sydney is particularly close to Brenda, who is known for being a gentle, loving mother.
Tell us about Sydney's relationship with Brenda.
It's almost unbreakable. They really were. They were really close.
Did Sydney and Brenda argue?
No.
Did they ever have loud screaming matches?
No.
Any arguments ever
No,
Was that a part of who Brenda was or could be?
not in the least.
Was before March 3rd violence a part of who Sydney was or could be?
No.
Sydney was always a sweet child. She was a lot like her mother in that she was quiet spoken most of the time. We laughed and so forth, but she was a worrier, a little bit of a worrier, and a child worrier type things, like worrying about overrunning a bucket in the lawn or something. But other than that, she was always sweet and kind. They also spent a lot of time doing puzzles together and, quiet time that they spent together.
Did you ever see or hear about Sydney and Brenda fighting or arguing or talking disrespectful to each other?
No, never.
Sydney is a little shy unless she is with close friends. Her best friend, Lauren Curie, describes her as social, charismatic, and chatty. She is also a talented soccer player, and academically, she excels. During her time at St. Vincent High School, the lowest grade she attains is a B. By the time she graduates, she has a grade point average of 3.8. One English teacher, Catherine Milligan, considers her such a model student that she elects her to mentor younger students during school retreats.
So you spent a lot of time with Sydney Powell as a student at high school.
I did.
Can you share with the jury what kind of student was she?
She was a good student, so she had a high GPA. She cared about her grades. She did her work. She was conscientious. She was quiet. She was respectful, and had a lot of friends. And was a well-liked student, well-liked person, respected by the faculty.
Was Sydney ever, to your knowledge, in trouble for fighting or arguing?
No, she was not to my knowledge.
Was she ever that kind of kid who was causing trouble, arguing with other students, causing drama, anything like that?
No, never.
But Sydney is also a perfectionist. She holds herself to impossibly high standards. Her family remember her struggling to cope with even the smallest of mistakes. She is often anxious, and stress sometimes overwhelms her. Her teacher, Catherine Milligan, remembers an unusual episode with Sydney before a chemistry presentation.
Can you tell the jury what you recall about that?
I didn't have a class, so it must have been when I had a planning period, and I was alone in my room, and the two of them came in, and Sydney was crying, and she was I would say distraught, and I said, what's wrong? And she said that she had a test, or I think it was a presentation for chemistry class, and she said, I can't see the numbers. And I said, what do you mean you can't see the numbers? She's like, I can't see the numbers. I can't present. I can't see what's in front of me. And I said, okay. I said, how can I help you? What do you want me to do? And she was really upset. She was pretty upset about it. So I said, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want to go down and talk to the teacher, or do you want me to? And she asked me to go. So I went down and I talked to her teacher, and I said, I assume she took the test on another day. It wasn't, I wasn't the person in charge of that test.
Okay. And you've seen other students have nerves when it comes to presenting in front of the class, is that correct?
I have. No one's ever told me they couldn't read the numbers, but certainly I've seen people be panicked, yes. I've never heard that somebody couldn't read the numbers.
Okay, so that stood out to you a little bit.
It did.
Despite this, by her senior year, she is captain of the school's soccer team and on the school's honor roll list, leading to a scholarship at Mount Union University. Mount Union is a small university just an hour from Akron. Several of her closest friends plan to attend, including her best friend Lauren. As the summer of 2018 draws to a close, her dad remembers her excitement as she prepared for college. Within months of starting at Mount Union, however, Sydney confides in a close friend that she's not coping.
Back in 2018, Sydney's talking to Amanda about really not being able to go out, haven't seen you, going on that I need to talk to someone about, and I feel like you do too, so it'd be great to hang out, and I miss you. Amanda says, thanks, of course, I miss you too. Thank God, I've cried so much these past days, it's unbelievable. I just really need to talk things through with someone.
Still, her best friend Lauren remembers spending their first summer vacation shopping at the mall and doing all of the usual things. Sydney gets a job coaching at a local kids' baseball team. Nothing seems amiss. What no one knows is that Sydney's grades have slipped dramatically. Over the course of her freshman year, her GPA had slipped to just 2.2. When she returns for her second year, she is placed on academic probation for the autumn term. Her roommates notice that she is sleeping up to 16 hours a day and going out much less. When there is no improvement in her grades, the staff at the university make the difficult decision to suspend her. It is December of 2019, and Sydney is unenrolled for the spring term of her second year. Staff sent a letter confirming the suspension, which she signs and returns. But here is where things start to turn strange. Sydney tells no one of her suspension, not her friends or her parents. She returns home for the Christmas break, and in January packs her bags and returns to the residential hall at Mount Union. A week into the new term, a sorority president at Mount Union approaches Michelle Gaffney, the associate dean. She tells her they have a girl attending who is not on the roster. Sydney has also been seen attending classes.
I asked Sydney about, I think when she first came in, I said, Sydney, there seems to be some confusion. It seems as though you haven't moved out of your residence hall yet, from what I can tell. But you're not enrolled this semester. You're not a student here this semester. And at first she replied to me that, I'm still a student here. And I said, well, you don't.
Did that catch your attention?
It did. And I had double checked before I called to see because I thought maybe she had appealed and I hadn't been notified that an appeal had gone through. So I checked and there was no schedule for Sydney. And I also checked at that time to make sure that she had received, with the Academic Affairs Office, to make sure she had received the letter and signed for it. In the event that maybe if she didn't get the letter, she didn't know she was suspended and she had just come back and started going to classes thinking she was not realizing that she was suspended, on the off chance that could happen. But I was able to verify from the Academic Affairs Office that they had received back from the post office the letter had been signed for, so I believed that she was aware that she had been suspended.
Sydney finally acknowledges that she received the suspension letter. A new deadline is fixed for her to leave the residence hall, but that deadline comes and goes, and Sydney is still living in the dorm. A second meeting is held, this time with Dean John Fraser. Sydney tells them that her parents have been having problems with her younger brother and that she didn't want to stress them. A new deadline is set for the following Wednesday, but by Friday of that week, Sydney is still showing no signs of leaving. On February 24th, security staff are called. Sydney finally agrees to move out. She tells her roommates that her parents want her to take some time off from the university. With her parents at work, she drives back to her house in Akron. Her mother, Brenda, is at work when she receives a notification from Life 360 that Sydney is home. She messages, "I just got a notification from Life 360 that you're home. Do you have afternoon classes? Is everything okay?" Sydney replies, "Nope, not this week. My teacher and her husband took this week as vacation time, so she just gave us a worksheet and some work online to do while she's gone. Plus, I have my meeting anyway, so I thought I'd stop home before." In another message sent the same day, Brenda writes, "Why do I always feel like you're scamming me? Just remember that you need the grades to keep your scholarships." Sydney replied, "Yes, I know. My grades are good. Thank you very much." Her parents are looking forward to her return during the spring break on the evening of March the 3rd. Over the coming week, they assume she is at college wrapping up classes for the term. In fact, she's been sleeping in motels and in her car. On the evening of March the 2nd, 2020, she returns to the residence hall and watches The Bachelor with her friends, as it has been their weekly routine. The next day, she drives home to Akron. She doesn't realize it, but her parents have just been on the phone with the university. and her obsessively guarded secret is about to be exposed. On March the 3rd, Stephen Powell returns to work, confident that his wife will sort things out with Sydney. At 12:36 p.m., he gets a text from Brenda saying that she is home with Sydney and waiting for someone from Mount Union Student Affairs to call her back. At 12:51 p.m., just 16 minutes later, his phone rings. But it's not Brenda. It's Detective Kenneth Deese, a longtime family friend who works for the Akron Police. Detective Deese tells Stephen that he has just heard a radio dispatch for a welfare check. He recognized the address. It's the Powell's home.
And he told you that there was an incident at your house that he heard over the radio.
Yes.
And is that when you remember at 12:52 to 12:53 trying to call Sydney and Brenda and not getting any answer?
Yes.
And then at 12:54, while you were actually on the phone with Mr. Deese, that Sydney called you back. Do you remember?
I don't remember.
You don't remember her calling you back? Did you remember you had that conversation with the Akron Police detective?
No. I remember talking to Sydney. I didn't know who initiated it.
Okay, and I apologize if I didn't mean to confuse you. But you had a conversation with Sydney after Mr. Deese, Detective Deese already called you.
Yes.
And that's when Sydney told you that Brenda was on the phone with Mount Union.
Yes.
And that's when you told Sydney that the police were on the way to the house.
Yeah.
Body cam footage from the responding officers captures a disheveled Sydney screaming about an intruder and trying to block them from entering the master bedroom where her mother lay dying.
And let me ask you this, Officer Jackson. When you first encountered Miss Powell, can you describe to her what she was acting like, what she looked like?
She was frantic, or I would say panicking. She had deep breathing, fast-paced speech. She had some blood on her sweatshirt that she was wearing.
Detectives interview her that night and collate the evidence. Where the back window had been shattered outside, there is evidence of blood smears, meaning that the attack on Brenda happened prior to the window being broken. Sydney's wounds on her knuckles are consistent with her having broken the window herself. They learn about the call with Mount Union and staff overhearing the attack, and that when Stephen called Brenda, Sydney told him that everything was fine until she heard the police were on their way.
One of the things specifically is when Mr. Powell told Detective Schaefer that he made this phone call or Sydney called him, and then he said that Brenda was on the phone, and he said, well, the police are already coming, and that's when she went back to there was some intruder. So I'm trying to process all that information and focus on what we're seeing at the scene as well.
And at some point in your investigation, did you also learn that Sydney had cuts to her hands?
Yes, she was taken to Akron City Hospital, so Detective King and Detective Rich Ray Williams responded to the hospital to try to talk to her, and they also took photographs of the actual injuries you're referring to.
But you're familiar with those injuries? You've seen those photographs?
I have.
And can you describe for the jury where were on her hands, where were those cuts?
They were on the outside of her hands by her knuckles.
The evidence points in one direction, and that evening, Sydney Powell is arrested and charged with the murder of her mother. Sydney is taken to a psychiatric facility for a 72-hour evaluation, where she is diagnosed as suffering from a psychotic episode. She is moved to a psychiatric hospital, where two psychiatrists describe her as in the throes of a first episode of schizophrenia. Dr. James Reardon evaluated Sydney in 2021. He diagnosed her with schizophrenia and a major depressive disorder. According to Reardon, Sydney was losing her grip on reality for months leading up to the attack, suffering from both visual and auditory hallucinations. She kept these symptoms secret, as well as her suspension from the university, because they were not consistent with the image that she had of herself.
She had managed to conceal that, and I mean, I think the concealment, you could say it was because she was deceptive. I think that a more likely explanation is that failing was not an option in her mind. I mean, in her mind, if she failed, then she was a failure. And I think that is when some of the early manifestations of thought disorder, some of the early auditory hallucinations were manifest. But again, she didn't seek or couldn't seek help. Because, you know, if you're a successful graduate student athlete at Akron St. Vincent St. Mary's, you don't do that. It was just, it was inconsistent with her picture of herself. I think that things began to, it's kind of like a building wave, you know, and I think the wave really began to get out of control probably in November, December of 2019. And again, I believe that it's very likely that at that point she was already, if she hadn't begun the process even earlier, probably maybe even summer of 19, certainly during the fall of 19, she began to kind of cross the line from normal self-critical thoughts to significantly disordered thoughts, to psychotic thoughts, including highly critical auditory hallucinations. You're worthless, you know, you're a failure, you don't deserve to live, those kinds of thoughts.
She is given antipsychotic medication and on March the 16th is put in the care of Brenda's mother, who lives on a farm. She is also placed under the supervision of a psychologist and a psychiatrist.
She did have an episode apparently where she felt that she was having some symptoms again, and she reported it immediately to her therapist and was advised to I don't know if the therapist called the doctor or if Sydney called the doctor right now. But the psychiatrist was notified immediately, and he changed her medication. And that made a huge difference after that. She reported to me that her symptoms were settling down again. She wasn't hearing so many noises. And I could just tell a whole difference in her demeanor at that point, where she really was starting to be Sydney again.
Okay. So Sydney has spent just about every day with you since March 16, 2022.
Yes.
Do you think she's faking a serious mental illness? Is she responding to changes in medication?
Yes.
Several months after the murder, Sydney is assessed for brain damage and epilepsy. As a soccer player, she had suffered several concussions, 2 of which had required hospitalization. But there is no evidence of either epilepsy or brain damage, and doctors conclude that her behavior is down to schizophrenia. The state will disagree, and during her 2021 trial, pursue a murder conviction. Sydney Powell's trial commences on September 7, 2023. She enters a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Testifying for the defense, 3 experts argue that Sydney was in the throes of a severe psychotic episode when she killed her mother.
You're going to hear that Cindy was reporting before March of 2020 audio and visual hallucinations. She was hearing voices. You're not worth anything. You're worthless. People know it. You're a failure. Those were the voices. She was seeing things, cartoon figures, looking like fire was coming out of her hands. She's going to talk about these the doctors are going to talk about, and the records are going to show these delusions of reference, meaning Sydney believed that everyone was talking about her.
Dr. Reardon testifies that Sydney only remembers flashes of the attack and sitting on the couch with her mom and comforting her, and going up and down the stairs of the basement, wanting to get away. Her next memory was being at the hospital. The prosecution argues that while Sydney has mental health problems, she does not meet the requirements of legal insanity at the time of the crime and can cite an array of evidence supporting their case. They argue that friends have said she was behaving normally on the evening of March the 2nd and that she had the clarity to lie to her parents and the university staff. The lead investigator on the case, Detective Whidden, argues that Sydney had the presence of mind to lie to her father on the phone after the murder and to stage the crime scene. She ran out of time when she learned the police were on their way, but she was lucid enough to tell the police that an intruder was to blame. Sylvia Obradovich, a psychologist for the prosecution, testifies that Sydney does not have schizophrenia, but rather a borderline personality trait, malingering, the faking of a mental illness, and an unspecified anxiety disorder. She examined nearly 10,000 pages of Sydney's cell phone records, including messages, internet, and social media searches, and found them to be typically of what an 18-year-old would search, including makeup, actors, and movies. Sydney was also regularly playing in a game with her friend. Obradovich said that someone entering a psychotic episode usually becomes totally withdrawn and says and does things that don't make sense. Sydney showed no signs of losing touch with reality, and her catatonic behavior after the murder was most likely due to shock and trauma.
Unfortunately, that action interrupted any of Miss Brenda Powell's future. I mentioned when I first came to this courtroom that this case is not, I don't even want to say that. This case is different. We're not going to hide that. It pulls on the emotions and the connections that each of us make as humans. It draws on our own experiences with struggles with mental health and relationships and those in our family. And I want to remind you that the state is aware of mental health. We acknowledge that. We acknowledge that even in Ms. Powell, anxieties and depressions and concerns have existed, that this lie was a heavy burden. But I need to remind you that mental health is not insanity. The law controls that. It's okay for you to recognize someone's anxiety, someone's mental health issues, even Ms. Powell's. I'm going to ask you to do that. It's okay to recognize the struggles in school and the fear of letting those down as heavy. But to relate these struggles to that of insanity, that does not line up and it shouldn't line up. You must use the evidence that's available to you to understand what her mindset was at the time of the crime.
The jury agrees. On September 20th, 2023, Sydney Powell is convicted of murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. She is yet to be sentenced.
Verdict form number 1 as to count 1 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 1. Verdict form number 2 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 2. Verdict form number 3 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of felonious assault as charged in count 3. And finally, verdict form number 4 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of tampering with evidence as charged in count 4.
Do you agree that Sydney was sane at the time of the murder? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.